Welcome everyone. Welcome to the third Connected Learning TV webinar of the month, part of a series about learning through programming called Coding is for Everybody, learning through creating, personalizing, sharing, and reflecting. I'm Karen Brennan. I'm an assistant professor at Harvard University in the Graduate School of Education, and I'm joined by
Mitch Resnick, a professor at the MIT Media Lab, where we're sitting right now.
And we're thrilled to be joined by Sunya, Ingrid, Jennifer, and Keith tonight. So tonight, we're going to be exploring how to learn to code and how learning to code can be supported in a wide range of settings. So looking at home, at school, in museums and libraries. But before we dive into the juicy content and conversation of tonight, a few sort of logistics. I guess let's deal with some administrative issues. So you may know that there's a live stream. We hope that you will participate in that. We hope that you participate in the chat, introducing yourselves, connecting with others, and asking us questions, because this is meant to be a distributed conversation.
It would be great to get questions as the conversation is going on here. We'd love to be hearing from you.
So live stream is one source of connections and conversation, but you can also share your questions and ideas via the Google+ Connected Learning community. That was a mouthful, which has more than 1,700 members, and we'd love to see the conversations continued there.
So they could do during the session now, but also during the upcoming week. We hope people will continue to share on the Google+ community.
Finally, John, representing Connected Learning down in the corner there, has set up a Google Doc for us. It's a sort of form of public group note. So as you have thoughts or imaginings about what you're hearing, things that you've experienced and that you'd like to share, we encourage you to share that. So all of these links should be appearing in the live stream if they haven't already. So before we dive into the conversation among the six of us, we thought we'd provide some background because this is the third in a series of four. So I'm going to turn it over to Mitch to give us a bit of a recap of what we've already discussed, and then we'll do some setup for the rest of this hour. Does that seem okay?
Yep.
Okay, great.
It's actually, when we think about our approach to learning, the design-based approach to learning, we often talk about several different aspects of it, of creating, and then, which we dealt with in the first week of the, of our session, which was 2 weeks ago now. And then last week we talked about personalizing, and then sharing and reflecting are the other components. So this week we're going to be thinking especially about sharing, the ways that people work together in different contexts and different situations, because we really think about coding not just as this individual experience. I think one thing about in the past, people often tended to have a very narrow view of what coding was about, and they imagined the individual coder sitting there by himself or herself at the screen. And we really think about it as a much more social process, and where it is you're doing in the community that you're a part of makes a big difference in the experience, both on how you experience it and what you learn from the coding experience.
So if you were a part of last week's webinar or checked out the activities of last week, we had two young Scratchers join us, and they talked about the role of the online community in supporting their learning and their exploration of coding through the Scratch online community. And so we're sort of continuing and broadening those conversations this week by looking at Scratch across, as used in a variety of settings. But it doesn't have to be just about Scratch. I mean, that's sort of what we know, and the people who you'll hear from tonight, that's one of the tools that they've been working with. But I encourage anyone who's participating at a distance to share their experiences across a range of tools, because this is really about the power of peer learning, the power of learning within a community, and sort of expanding the range of how we think about learning beyond the walls of the school, which I think is really at the heart of connected learning.
Yeah, and I think for us it's really exciting to see these activities in so many different types of contexts and so many different places and at different times of the day. I know oftentimes people talk about lifelong learning, but then other people recently have started talking about life-wide learning, like throughout the day, or day-long learning, not just lifelong learning. And I think from the different contexts we see here, whether it's in school, outside of school, homes, formal settings, informal settings, you really get the sense that learning happens all of the time. And I think the best learning experiences are ones that do cut across a lot of these different contexts.
So to represent these different perspectives, we have 4 people who very graciously donated some of their time this evening to join us. So as John posted in the live stream, we're joined by a parent, a teacher, a librarian, and a museum educator to try and capture these different ways of working and participating. So the way we were going to structure this is like Mitch and I are kind of nosy, so we were going to ask questions and then just take turns having people answer. And then pulling questions from the live stream, questions from Twitter, questions from Google+. We're going to try and monitor all these channels. But maybe a first basic question is, who are you and what do you do? Does that
sure.
Okay, so we start with Sunya.
Sure. My name is Sunya Trauger, and I come to Scratch as a mother. My kids go to Cambridge Public Schools, and they learn Scratch as part of their after-school program. They've been really enthusiastic about Scratch, and they show us their programs at home and feel very, like they've accomplished something every time they do. So I come to this meeting as from a perspective of a parent who doesn't actually program, but I see my kids do this all the time.
And excuse me, I have a little bit of a cold, but my name is Ingrid Gustafson. I'm a technology integration specialist for Cambridge Public Schools. I've been at the K-8 level and most recently at the middle school level, so 6th through 8th graders. I've had the chance to do after-school programs with Scratch, teach professional development to teachers in our district around Scratch, and do it during the class, like during classes during the day. So I've done Scratch a little bit of everything in the school system.
And Keith, do you want to go next?
Oh, sure. Yeah, my name's Keith Proflat. I'm the Director of Learning Technologies. It's a department at the Science Museum of Minnesota. And I've been using Scratch since Scratch came out, and I've been able to, with Scratch, work with both in our museum. We have summer classes, workshops. We call them camps. That'll be a week long. We also have often collaborated with teachers who have come and been very interested in Scratch as a tool. So we've gone into the classroom. We've done after-school settings programs with teachers. We have even worked with librarians in the past, and one of the librarians that I've worked with is right in the middle there, Jennifer. So that's my program.
And I'm Jennifer Nelson. I currently work at the State Library Services in Minnesota, and my experience with Scratch, Keith and I, back in 2007 maybe, started working together to really figure out how we could bring this wonderful tool and the skills and literacies that kids can learn using something like Scratch into the public library setting. So we did a 3-year project that brought together a set of libraries from across the country to teach the librarians how to do it, help them understand how to work through to get administrative support, how to get through the technology piece of it, just really considering a whole bunch of issues related to using Scratch and programs like Scratch to help kids get those really key important 21st century skills. So really looking at ways, for me, this is about Scratch and its companions is about how do we help libraries adapt to the 21st century and remain involved in the business of literacy when some would say, you know, the book is dead, but literacy certainly is not. So it's kind of where I come from.
Actually, I'm even going to plug the book that you and Keith did. So one of the outputs of the work you've done together with Keith, I know, is this book, Technology and Literacy, that the two of you published a couple years ago.
Yeah.
Maybe we can follow up and sort of dive in a little more deeply about some of the things that you see the young people learning as they code, some of the reasons for why you think it's been useful in your settings to engage kids in coding. Maybe Ingrid, do you want to get started with that?
I've seen a lot of things that students have learned with Scratch. One of my favorite stories was of a 7th grade student who really didn't understand number lines and positive and negatives and XY grids. And he was able to really understand if I want something to move to the left, it needs to be a negative number. So that was a huge connection for him, just because he wanted his character on the screen to move to the left, and understanding that on an XY grid, left is negative. And that was a connection that he wasn't able to make in math class. And that's one I think is very specific with math and coding, and they seem to make sense. I've also seen a lot of things that students have learned just in terms of planning out a project and time management and problem solving and what do you do when you get stuck and you don't know what to do? How do you help yourself to get through that barrier? So a lot of different things that students have been able to learn using Scratch that other types of projects may not be able to do as meaningfully as when it's your own project that you're working on. Just last week we did a project with 7th graders, and it was kind of very restricted in the sense that they had to include 3 things they learned from social studies. But we had a couple students who said, this has been the most meaningful project I've done all year. And it was because they were really able to translate what they had learned in a way that was meaningful to them. So they said, you know, I didn't like doing the video project we just did because I felt like I had to do a video and it had to look a certain way. And with these Scratch projects, they could really choose any background, any characters, any sound, anything. And they really enjoyed that. So.
Sonia, just from your interaction with your kids as they talk about the work they've done with programming and coding, what's the sense that you get of what they're gaining from the experience?
Well, I have 2 children. My son, who's 10 years old, has some issues with executive functioning and focusing, and it's the first time that I've actually seen him actually really enjoy learning and being self-motivated is with Scratch, and you know, sitting there and finishing a project and putting things in a logical sequence and you know, learning to think logically. It's been just a wonderful thing to see him really into it, and instead of saying I don't like school. My daughter is 8 years old, and she is on Scratch every day. And she was teaching me, Mom, I'll show you how to, you know, do this animation project and, you know, frame by frame animation and how to, you know, make a loop of logical thinking and how to repeat something and move it in the right direction. And she's 8 years old, and it's amazing to me how well she's doing. I have to show you her project sometime. They love it. I mean, they're on it every day. It's like an immediate feedback they get from, you know, getting something to work. It motivates them. It kind of creates this kind of a motivational thing where they're getting a positive feedback.
Positive feedback loop, yeah.
So it's really been wonderful for my children to, you know, see them learning in an independent way, and with each other. They help each other. You know, they'll get stuck on something, and then you know, the brother will come over and show the sister how to do it, or vice versa, you know, and they're kind of competing with each other on their little animation projects. So it's great to see, and really a unique thing.
Well, Jennifer, it'd be interesting to hear your views. I must admit, when we first launched Scratch, it's now more than 6 years ago, to be honest, we weren't thinking so much about libraries. We had done a lot of work in after school centers and community centers and museums. So we hadn't thought very much about it. But then it really took us by surprise. There was this proliferation of seeing more and more libraries over the last 5 years starting to get engaged with coding. Maybe you can say some about some of the things that you've seen, the type of learning experiences you've been observing.
Sure. Well, I think in terms of learning experiences of the youth, it's been very similar to what Sonia and Ingrid talked about. We see those sorts of things on a kind of a daily basis. One of the issues that public libraries have had, which is why Scratch 2.0 is so great, is how do you get the software loaded onto a computer to make a persistent opportunity for a kid who may not have access to a computer at home to be able to use the resource. And we were able to negotiate that at several, certainly at the libraries that I've worked at and that worked as part of our project, but I'm seeing throughout the country that libraries are really able now to say, oh yeah, this is a valid tool. It's not going to harm our system or our network. It's not going to make us go down if we...
Just so people are aware, just to make sure some of the people might not be aware, the original version of Scratch, you had to download an application and install it on the computer, which, again, in some settings, there's a lot of challenges, administrative challenges in doing it. So with the new version of Scratch, as you mentioned, it's something that you can create right in the web browser.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that I've seen really fun about Scratch is really set the standard for libraries for being able to do this work, and for librarians feeling like they had what it takes to help kids learn these kinds of skills and have these kinds of experiences. The whole idea, and Keith and I talk about a little bit about it in our book, that you don't have to be an expert coder in order to provide kids an opportunity to learn this way. The kind of low floor that Scratch brings along is perfect in a library setting. because really it's about just letting the kids have access to the tool and opening up and being okay with them experimenting, trying, doing the iteration, failing, trying again, making something work. So it's quite fun. We've seen a lot of the collaborative stuff with kids in some of the classes and workshops that we've done. One of the other things that we've done with Scratch that I found really fun, we had a teen leadership program. We called it the Teen Tech Squad, where we hired teens, low-income teens, to provide classes and workshops for younger youth. And that was really a wonderful experience to watch the older kids be able to turn around, get their training from the Science Museum staff, and then turn around and teach the younger kids. So really providing that mentorship, particularly in areas of this, in Minneapolis in particular, in areas of the city where kids might not have a lot of adult role models or older youth role models that are positive. So really felt like we're providing that kind of opportunity. So it's wonderful. It's been a great resource. So think about libraries. Remember, we're in the same business, literacy.
Yeah, well, I did this idea of literacy. It's one thing that we have talked about as part of this webinar series is sort of analogies with writing, about really seeing coding as a new way of expressing yourself in the same way. And actually, I think especially it's relevant for today's discussion about going across different contexts. I think one thing that makes writing special is that it does get used in all contexts. It's not that you just write in school and then never at home, or just write at home and not in school. Although sometimes the way kids experience it, it's as if it's these two totally different things. Yep. So I think with writing, we want to make it that kids become literate. They're writing in school informs their writing at home and entries they might write in a diary and vice versa. I think we see coding the same way, that we would hope that it's something that cuts across and that kids can experience in all types of different settings. Actually, I don't know, Keith, I don't know if you have any thoughts on, especially this going across different settings. Since you've worked in a variety of different settings, maybe if you have any thoughts about the way it moves across different settings.
Yeah, I think actually it's pretty interesting. I mean, because I've been in schools and libraries, and kind of actually, which is sort of strange, the new setting that I'm working in is the museum. Normally my programs are separate from the museum experience, so if you come to a museum, there's usually stuff there to engage you in some way. And it just recently, and actually we started kicking this off with the last Scratch Day, wherever that was, May 18th, where we started putting Scratch and making it available to visitors. And when we have visitors, it's anyone from K to Gray. It's anyone who walks in the door, and it's free choice. So basically, people are coming up for maybe the first time in their lives, and they're coming up to see this thing that might be on a screen or computers. And what's happening, one of the things that we did for Scratch Day was I took something called a Lego WeDo, which is a physical device that allows you to connect to Scratch. So you can do physical things in the physical world and then have reactions in Scratch. And one of the kids in one of our classes had developed a little driving game using paper plates and this little Lego sensor. And when people came in, we just had the little paper plate steering wheel, which had a drawing on it, and Scratch and a great big screen. And we had kids who it looked like they were 2, 3, 4, walking up, grabbing the steering wheel, starting to look at the screen and playing Scratch. And then the parents would come up and they would start to ask, well, what's going on here? And we'd explain that Scratch is this free program that lets people make the things that your child is playing with right now, but also learn how to make those things. So then we have grandparents coming up who are coming behind, and we have this whole range of people who are seeing these experiences for the first time. And Scratch, in this kind of new setting for me, allows you to be able to engage people for the first time, see something that can react to them, and then it kind of opens a door that allows them to be able to know with relatively quick ease, to actually start to manipulate and change what happens in Scratch. In other words, they start to code. We have them playing with the blocks. We have them taking things apart. And this is in a free choice environment, not like in a classroom where you know what you're going to get and you know what the tools are. This is something that's happening to a wide range of adults, kids, elders, and they're seeing this kind of power of computing and also the availability of it. And it's sort of changing the way people are thinking about it. And I just wanted to also add, whenever we would do classes, and we run classes every summer, and you know, 3 months of classes of video game production or making different kinds of classes that allow people to make things that, like I was describing, have physical connections to Scratch, we always have parents and grandparents, siblings come in, and they're always asking all the questions and not really having the ability to play with it. So the museum environment actually allows us to introduce this conceptual idea of making programs and having computers do things that you can create on a computer and really kind of gain this power. And it's that sort of work that's starting to kind of feed back into the museums themselves, where the museums are seeing that as an opportunity to make new kinds of interactions where the people who are coming in can actually change and co-author the experiences, if that makes sense. They're starting to help us build the experience as well as use the experience. So it's all new to me, so it's pretty darn exciting.
So we have a flurry of questions on the live stream.
Which is great. We're really happy that people are giving questions.
Yeah, so I'm going to start just pulling them off from the top to the bottom. So actually one of the first questions that popped up, I think, connects to things you were just talking about, Keith. It was from Tara asking, you know, she wants to start a Scratch group. What are important elements? How do you do that? So some of the things I heard you talking about was creating this invitation to play and enter into it that isn't sort of top down, that you have choice. What are other strategies that people have tried in terms of inviting people into a first experience with programming?
So at one of my previous schools I've worked at, I would kind of do what Keith was talking about, inviting people to come and play at an event that already existed at the school. So I would set up Scratch on tables at math night and at the art night. So for art, I would put up any type of project that either students made that were connected somehow to art, which is very loose, and same thing with math, like everything. I feel like everything in Scratch can connect to one subject matter or another. So I would put up some art projects, put up some interactive art projects, and just invite people to come over and play. And I would have students come over, their siblings come over, parents, teachers, grandparents, kind of like Keith was saying, everybody would come over and say, oh, what's going on these computers? Like, can I go in and change something? And so people would go in and change the colors or change the score in the math game if they're like, oh, I think this should be 5 points instead of 1 point. So it was kind of nice to just see, by having the tables out and having the projects available, everybody kind of going in and playing around with it. And then the next step is, oh, well, could we do something like this at the school? And I think by just exposing and then showing people how easy it is, then it kind of snowballs and gets a lot of interest and excitement, and you can really ride that momentum into getting an after-school setting type of club setup. So that seemed to be extremely successful for me in the past, and a ton of fun for me and everybody who participated, and students who helped out who already knew Scratch were so proud to teach it to people who hadn't done it before, show their parents what they've been doing, the younger siblings. So it's just a lot of fun.
That's great. Jennifer?
I think one of the things that we did was use the Scratch cards. I don't know if you've updated them or you have the set, but would just lay those around on tables and encourage people just to pick them up and work with them. I actually did that as part of a staff training to get just to give some exposure to staff. I think it would work equally well with kids, but some people I think come into Scratch and it's almost too overwhelming. They don't know where to start or how to start. So the whole remix and teaching people how to remix, I think, was was a really nice introduction to give people. You don't have to make a whole ton of choices. You can, you can start with something that's there. There's nothing new under the sun. You can always tinker with something. I think that was really helpful for getting people comfortable who may have been a little uncomfortable at first or not quite sure what they wanted to do. Think, oh, I'm not an artist. I can't draw a picture of myself. You remember that one, Keith? I can't draw a picture of myself. So giving them lots of options that way and really being encouraging that you don't have to be an artist, a mathematician, or a coder. You can just get in and start tinkering with things, and people come up with beautiful projects just with that comfort level. So I think starting there is a nice way to do it.
I have one question that I'd seen in the live stream with the suggestion of starting by remixing. Somebody in the live stream did ask, how can you find readable projects? And I do think that is one of the challenges, because I think it's great to start with remixing, but sometimes people do see the challenge of they look at projects from the online community and they look at it, it's intimidating, it's hard to understand them. And the one thing that we try to do with the new version of Scratch, like we have a separate studio or gallery. They're called starter projects. They're explicitly meant to be more readable projects to encourage people to remix. But I've also seen people at different settings create their own collection of readable projects. So I know helping people get started by having projects that are easier to read and modify is one thing I've seen people do at certain settings.
And Susan Enenheim in the live stream is sharing her experiences with having developed the scratch card concept with her students, where her students were generating scratch cards. But I was interested in hearing from Sunya, like your experiences of watching your kids make sense of other scratch projects. Has that been a part of what they're doing, and how have they gotten you involved?
Yeah, they're particularly interested in their other kids in their class that make scratch projects, and they'll show each other the projects and kind of go from there, incorporate some of the ideas. A lot of the boys seem to like things blowing up and how to create that, and I think they do learn from each other, especially my kids learn from each other, and their best buddies in the after-school program are also really into Scratch. So yeah, they definitely share ideas on how to get something to happen. A lot of these projects are animation that I've seen, like things moving across the screen, or they're at that stage where they want to make games, but so far it's just like moving a character around, and they'll get ideas from each other.
So we've heard scratch cards as an example of resources. We've heard access to other people as resources. What else does it take to make programming work in each of your settings, and what are some of the big challenges?
Well, one of the things that we found was the flexibility of the space. So having people be able to use not fixed desktop computers, but laptops, so they could move around a room and sit next to each other easily, having enough space between tables and chairs, having a room set up, I think, in kind of a U-shaped room that allows an instructor to walk behind or in front, having a projection screen so that they can demonstrate and show things to a larger group. I think we found that to be helpful.
Actually, that's one thing. I think it's great that you mentioned that, because I think just the space makes such a huge difference. I know Karen and I have done lots of Scratch workshops over the years, and when we do workshops at conferences, we usually go in there and we turn the room upside down. We always worry what the conference organizers will think of us, but we don't want the, usually walk in and there's neat rows of tables with computers, and we just know it's not going to be as good a learning experience that way. So I think it's great they're paying attention to the space that way.
So people, scratch card, space. What else do we have as advice for? And challenges. I also don't want to lose some of the challenges of supporting programming.
Well, I think one of the challenges that we've experienced, and this happens both in the workshops and programs, but also in the free choice areas, is if we get started with projects that are a little too sophisticated, we find that people get lost in the sophistication. They're excited about this really interesting game that they want to play, but then they don't have any way of sort of pulling it apart. And what you're talking about earlier about ways to get at that, simplifying those sort of projects, we've begun to try something a little new too as well. We're starting to kind of think about different ways to get someone into a project right away. We did this at our last Scratch Day, and it's a project that was developed by one of our instructors. It's the idea of like having a thematic-based project where you do just a little tiny bit of animation, but it really is, the idea is to bring the person's own kind of sourcing to them. So we do something, the Scratch joke card. And that idea is just to tell a knock-knock joke or a very simple joke, and then have some sort of visual response to it. And what we've noticed is that the language part really attracts people. They can do something very simple. The art part of actually drawing out this expressive joke might be really interesting. And we also give away candy. We give away candy that has jokes on it, Laffy Taffy. Just this idea that kind of simplify a main project to get started with, and then sort of make the walls really wide in terms of interpretation or ideas. All kids have heard simple jokes, And I think just starting there, we used to jump headlong into kind of more sophisticated stuff, but as we've stepped back, we see this real richness that's happening with starting simpler and then letting that grow while the kids or the adults are starting to develop their ideas.
Actually, on the thematic note, at either the last Scratch Con or the Scratch conference before that, you did a workshop on My Excellent Vacation. And someone in the stream, Susan Endenheim, attended that workshop and was saying how much she enjoyed that. So it's the power of an interesting theme, right? It's like,
yeah, but it goes back to that same idea that we're not like, we don't own any of these ideas. I think these ideas that connect to personal experiences first, and those conversations might be about computer programming, but they actually just might be about social experiences and talking to people and saying, well, what are those gems of those things that you learn about somebody might be really interesting to kind of tell a little story about or illustrate using Scratch. And as we go, you know, humor or jokes or stories or past or travels like the Excellent Vacation, all of those things they give us a lot more mileage than just our standard game class that we teach a lot. The other ones seem to give us kind of this wider area of all these rich examples of people's personal reflections. So to me, I don't know how exactly you get it, but I think creating not only a good environment, but also creating a good social environment where you learn a little bit about each of the people who might be around you, I think that's kind of essential. You know, that's how good teachers work. And then being able to share that in some way really sort of supports each individual's ideas and you know, their craft.
Yeah, I know you've often started different workshops and classes with people making an About Me project, where it's not just that people can work on something that they're familiar with, but it's a way for people to start to get to know one another by looking at each other's projects.
which was actually inspired by a sample project I saw of Keith's called Memory Bowl, which I thought was really beautiful, that you just have a simple collage where you click on different things and it reveals different aspects of the person, and it's just such a nice entry point. So I thank you, Keith, for that. It's been part of my repertoire for a long time. What about you, Ingrid? Strategies for getting things off the ground and challenges?
Again, I'm similar to Keith. So I've taught Scratch to first and second graders all the way up to 8th grade. And with the first and second graders, I kind of second what Mitch was saying with using sample projects, which are now in the studios on the Scratch website, because they're usually very simple and focus on one thing. And then I would go in and have the students change one thing in there in that project to make it their own. So kind of along the same lines of making a personal connection to the project. So if they really liked the colors, maybe they could go in and add some more color to the project that are their favorite colors. Or if they didn't like the way a sprite looked, then I'll show them how to go in and change the sprite to make it match their personality more. And I think that goes back to making the Scratch code readable and breaking it down, because if they want to go in and change a sprite, where do they do that? If they want to go in and change how fast something moves, how do I go in and look at the code and find that one spot where the sprite is moving? Or speed, that was one of the other things. How do I make something move faster or slower? You got to go into the code and find that one spot. So by starting with the simple projects and kind of dissecting those down and turning it into no longer a sample project, but something that they can relate to and they're proud of, I think it hits a couple of the points that we've talked about. For challenges in the teaching setting, especially in schools where we have a lot of things that need to be covered during the school year, I think having enough time to do these projects is always one of the biggest challenges, and making sure that you plan for extra days. I was just telling Karen and Mitch here how field trips and such have kind of cut into what I was hoping would be our sharing days. So, and I think the sharing piece is so important. And so making sure that there's enough time to do that, by also giving the students the freedom to create their own projects and not having it be too structured and too constraining. So I find that always to be a fine balance between having enough time to complete a project, making sure they can do their own work on it, and also having time to share it and critique it at the end. So you're really kind of hoping that there's enough time for all of that.
Here's some other questions from the live stream. One of them was just about ways of organizing when you're working with groups of kids, ways of organizing, like whether you encourage group kids to work together with multiple kids on the same computer, or whether working on their own. What are the different strategies you've used just in organizing the ways kids work together, whether it's in a classroom or a museum workshop or in a library workshop?
Yeah, I think that connects to a couple of different threads related to like what are the different roles that people take on in the environment.
Yeah.
So Tara was talking about having kids present things. So yeah, how do you think about the roles of people and how do you support those connections and your role in all of this? Like, what do you do? What do the young learners do? What do other adults do?
That was a very long question.
That was.
Can we rephrase it? I think my cold is getting to me. I'm sorry.
When you look at all of the people in each of your learning environments, what are the different roles that people play? What are the different roles that people play, and what do you do to support those interactions between people? I don't know if that covers all of the different questions, but
yeah. So I think in schools, you've got students, teachers, parents. And I'm a technology specialist, but I have like the classroom teachers, and I have some teachers I work with who are ready to use Scratch but don't necessarily want to learn it while we're doing a project. So I go in and I kind of show them what they need to know, and then just enough to get the project going. And then if they want to learn more, they can learn more on their own. But so they kind of take little bits of information as they can handle it, and then they're learners themselves. The teachers are learners, and then you've got the students who are teachers and learners also. So I think the roles kind of all intermingle in schools because you have some students who know a lot about Scratch and they finish and then they want to share right away and they go and help everybody else. And then we've got other students who are just, I don't know what to do. So they're kind of on the same playing field as the teacher. Then we've got some parents who have a lot of knowledge about coding and Scratch and they want to help out as well. So I don't know if I'm answering the question, but there is a lot. I feel like there's a lot of overlap with Scratch because it allows for teaching and learning at the same time.
Keith or Jennifer, anything about sort of the way you organize the roles of different people and how they work together within your settings? Oh, yeah, I think you're muted, Keith.
With the workshop kind of things that we do, so again, I'm talking about two different areas where I work. I work where visitors come and it's not structured whatsoever, and then we have workshops in classes, and it's really similar to what Ingrid is saying, that everybody kind of has, they all have roles of learners, but then they all have roles of leading kind of the discussions and sharing the ideas. So this sort of flipping back between teaching and learning and teaching, it's a really beautiful cycle that happens with Scratch, and we always start with a fairly structured project in our workshops, but that project immediately turns into teaching other people next to you in the workshop on how to do things. So really the instructors for our workshops are really, we like to think of them more as facilitators and kind of being there just in time to help people. Scratch seems to be so autographic, it kind of helps you on the way, and it's really sort of the process of debugging. That's where we the facilitators or the instructors get involved the most. But as the week goes on, usually they're a week long, we actually start to engage other students. Whenever some student has a solution to an idea or a really creative way of handling something, we try to have them share that up in front of the class or with each other and point it out, and then have them become, I don't know, an expert, or have them become a leader in that moment with their idea, to be able to share their idea and explain their idea. So it's always this sort of back and forth flow of being, learning about something, but then sharing what you know with others as kind of the cycle and process of the workshops.
Jennifer?
We actually at libraries we've learned from Keith, so really taking that approach to letting people sort of self-define their roles within it, and having the instructor, the facilitator, the volunteer as the guide or the question answer, but really allowing kids to really champion what they know. You can run into issues with that with kids who can be maybe a little overbearing or really want to be in a more forthright role than maybe the situation warrants, but that's that's working with kids, and you just work through that and gently redirect. And but if you're giving kids opportunities to show what they know on a regular basis, I think that happens a little less often, because the kids who want the attention don't need it quite so much because they're already getting it.
I think the different roles is something we've also seen in the online community, which is again another space or another community where kids take on different roles of supporting one another. And actually one thing that we've tried to do is create different roles so that, like, community moderators or welcoming committees where, kids will welcome new members of the Scratch community. And I think we've seen that that's been, it works in all different dimensions, because the kids who are taking on that role feel good about being able to share their expertise and be able to play their role in supporting the community, but that really helps the others as well.
I would just jump in and say, as a person who's experienced that many times, that actually that's the most exciting thing about the online part. I mean, I at first was kind of skeptical because I love the idea of face-to-face and human beings talking to human beings, and online I noticed this real freedom of really young kids and expert kids, and who I thought were kids for the most part, always giving me suggestions, and it sort of flattened my whole idea about how to learn in communities with this sense. It actually, to me, in some ways was more powerful even than when we're sharing out in the classes, because you have this sense that they have a platform in which they can help anyone. So I think enhancing that and just like continuing to support that in whatever way, I learn a lot about how the kids who are helping me via the online, I learn the language that they use, and then I'm able to actually take the way they speak to me online and coach kids in person to be able to talk to each other in real supportive ways. So I'm learning all sorts of kind of really interesting techniques and sort of social muscle just from the online program. So that is great.
But I think it's true that it does need to be nurtured and supported. It's not that it just happens automatically. So whether it's in the online community or the in-person communities, as you're doing, trying to sort of help support that type of environment where kids are going to be, supporting one another. For me, it goes beyond. It's not just kids offering specific, coding advice, but one thing I feel good when I see someone expressing some frustration that I'm frustrated with this project, I'm going to give up. And then you see other kids rallying around, no, you shouldn't give up, you should keep on trying. And you see that happening a lot. You were going to ask another question?
Yeah, I was curious about next steps and other activities. So this came up in last week's webinar that people were really curious about, like, is there life beyond Scratch, both after Scratch? So what do people transition to, and what other types of activities circulate around it? So Sonia, I wonder if you could kick us off with, like, what are the other types of things that your kids enjoy doing, and do you have a sense of what next steps might be? So now coding, then what, I guess, is the short form of my question.
Or even now, the coding they do, does it influence their other activities as well? Does it, connect over to other things that they're doing now?
I think it does connect to my son's, taken now to Photoshop and modifying things in Photoshop and uploading his modifications into his video games. So he's gotten this real sense of empowerment, being able to not just passively receive information, or he has a sense that you can change things. And I think that's a powerful idea. What I would like to say is I wish, there's such an effort in terms of libraries and teachers, but the parents need to be educated about this. And one way we found out more about it was through Scratch Day at MIT. And I think if the kids had support at home, if their parents sat with them and encouraged them at home when they were doing their Scratch projects, where they're actually learning to code something that could be very powerful in their logical thinking and potentially getting into, more advanced programming in the future, I think that would be really powerful. My husband has taken an interest in programming from looking at my kids' Scratch and, doing Scratch, and he's doing Visual Basic programming now. He just started with a project and showing my son how he could make a little calculator and, how you could actually create some of the things that you see on the computer. They're coming from somebody's head. And I think, giving your kids that sense of empowerment is probably the best thing, and then anything's possible from there.
Yeah. Kind of going off of that, I can't count how many students want to use GarageBand to make their own soundtracks for their Scratch projects, and it could be soundtrack that's like 5 minutes long, or it could be I need 10 seconds of music. But I think after Scratch, we do a non-Scratch Scratch day where I install any free programming environment that I can find on the computers, and I say, okay, go and explore something else and try something else out. How does this compare to Scratch? What are some things that you think you could do in this environment, or you can't do in Scratch, but you can do here, and vice versa. So we've done Alice, seems to be one of the more popular ones. I see some people in the chat mentioning Python. I have a lot of students who have transitioned to Python, even to more 3D environments. So I have one student who's very into Unity, making 3D worlds. So I think it's just a small stepping stone in the whole coding environment, but I really try to encourage them to look at other things, and that there are this is just one part of programming, and they make it very accessible in Scratch, but you can also do so much more in other programming languages.
I see Aloha Ann saying that we should have workshop for parents. I think that's a great idea, like getting parents to try it out and enjoy it, and being able to help their kids actively. I was able to help my daughter with one of her projects. She was trying to make something move faster, and I could figure out how to do it by seeing her do it. And I think just doing more for parents. So we built a whole community. So it's not just at school, but they have the support at home that kind of re-emphasizes that it's important. It's an important skill. So I think, and it's fun.
I'm going to jump off that too. We've tried this a couple times where we've had these sort of parallel classes for parents and kids, and and it's Scratch for both. And it's really, in the parents class, we spend time talking about, well, the social nature of gaming, but then we also have them make a Scratch project. And with that kind of class, in that parallel way, we have the kids just basically do one of our Scratch classes, and the idea is that the parents oftentimes have questions and ideas that aren't necessarily about Scratch itself, but is gaming safe, or kind of the social sort of environment around gaming. And being able to do those Scratch classes where they're both working on stuff, it's the best thing of all is at the end of the class we have the kids come in, and the parents, then they get together and then they share the projects with each other. The other thing about that is that the parents have a safe place to be learners instead of doing that in front of their kids. Oftentimes we've tried to do kids and parents together, and the parents will always step back a little bit and allow their children to do more of the learning, and they also might be a little hesitant to learn in front of their children and show that they don't necessarily know how to do something. So creating that parallel thing that isn't just for the parents but also have them both work at the same time has actually been it's worked really well, and we've been really excited about the ideas behind, could we expand that? Is there a way to take this kind of idea, this concept, into schools or community centers as well? So it's been really great.
Jennifer, life after alongside Scratch?
The one word that came to mind was Minecraft. And libraries actually have started Minecraft servers. I mean, they really have taken to task with that. And I think that in libraries stems from having started several years ago doing video gaming in libraries, so that's sort of a takeoff from that. My interest was Scratch, and Minecraft is really about how we teach kids to be better consumers of the video games and better understand kind of what they're getting as somebody who uses one. So definitely Minecraft is the next step. In libraries, there's been a lot of work creating digital media spaces. Several projects going on now, really looking at what are the spaces that need to happen and what do we want to have available. Certainly music, the garage band, the video editing, stop motion animation, just pretty much the wide gamut of free tools that are out there, I think are being used in libraries pretty readily. And we're having just even, I think it's related, sort of the maker movement coming in, as well as pieces of, what is the real world way that we learn to build and to do things. It's kind of separate slices of the same pie, if you will, in terms of really helping, again, with that whole literacy. What does it take to be successful in society today? I think it's all kind of merging together in that sense. But Minecraft is definitely the big one.
My kids are crazy about Minecraft. They do Minecraft all the time. And I think it has a real appeal. If that can somehow be tied into programming, that would really bring the kids in. My son already, as I said, makes mods. I'm not sure exactly what that is, or downloads mods all the time and modifies them in Photoshop and GIMP. They both use GIMP. And it's just wonderful to see kids actually changing things on the computer instead of being passive recipients, like me.
I just want to mention one other thing we're trying to do. We do this class called Blocks and Strings, where we're trying to take graphical-based or visual-based programming, and we're trying to move it into text-based programming. And one of the programs that we use is something called Processing, which is free. And another program which is very similar, almost exactly the same, is something for this little robotic kit called Arduinos. And those are both open source. And for us, it's been the transition from moving from this actually really easy to use thing to this more complex text-based thing where you can make mistakes typing things just with colons and syntax areas. But doing those together, bringing both of those sort of programming environments like Scratch, or we also use something called Design Blocks, which is a visual-based programming language, to make images, and then moving quickly within that time into another language to do something with the analogy visual-based with processing. We're starting to see, we ran it a couple times last summer and it was very successful. We're starting to see that actually the movement between one language and another, if it's done, carefully, actually we've been pretty successful. And all the students that they're all coming out with this experience of kind of a broader notion of what computer programming is. Not just I move stuff around or I push things or I remix things, but it might even start something from as simple as typing text commands and getting a sense of just how powerful those text commands are. And that those may actually be the same as those little blocks that you move around. So this is an area that our whole museum is very curious about, because we actually think that we can start to teach programming in the floor of the museum and create these things where people just walk up and playfully explore different programming environments. So we're really jazzed about that.
So I think we have time for one last question, and we thought, again, on this theme of looking across context and speaking within context, what advice do each of you have for a parent, a teacher, a librarian, and a museum educator who's interested in getting involved in the coding is for everybody movement?
But hasn't done anything yet, so they're just getting started. So what would you suggest they do as some of their first steps?
I can go.
Okay.
Working with teachers, I think, if you're a fellow teacher out there, I think just being open to the idea and kind of like with the students, being okay with not knowing everything. My most successful integrations of Scratch during the school day are with teachers who admit that they know nothing about Scratch, but they're just willing to do something different, and they're done with doing the same old and want to reach their students in a different way, and they're thinking about differentiation, and how all students can get something out of the technology, and those have been wonderful projects to work on. So I think just having an open mind and being ready to try something new, and coding, it just may happen to be coding, but it's not that scary. It's just another way to do a project and show student learning, and you happen to be learning something at the same time. So it's like this hidden little treat on top of it. You get to learn coding. So
as a parent, I would suggest sitting down with your kids and, like after dinner and with a computer, and having them show you what they're doing and the code, and learn from them and not be afraid to learn from them. It's really fun, and maybe you'll have some ideas on how to work on it together. We started a new project with my daughter. She was helping me with my project and teaching me how to, make things move across the screen. And I think it gives them a sense of confidence, and then you learn as well. I don't have to know everything, but it's fun for them to be able to teach me something, and then, I think that's the great way to do it, is to sit down with your kids and do it together.
So can I follow up on one thing? So it's Susanette saying that still think it's scary. So one thing I just did with the project is in school is we actually created kind of a backup system to, if Scratch didn't work out, we still had a way to evaluate their learning. So we created a simple Google form, and we had the kids write out what they were trying to do in Scratch. So the content of it, so that way if things didn't quite work out, you still have a product. So you still have their writing, you still have what it was they were trying to accomplish, even if the project didn't work the way it was supposed to work. So it was really nice, because for a couple students, they just didn't quite get where they needed to get for the project, but we still had a list of what it was they were trying to accomplish and their learning for the subject matter. So I think just creating a little backup safety net when you're trying out Scratch may make it maybe a little bit less scary. So hopefully.
Having the plan B.
Yes, having a plan B where if the project doesn't quite work out, and I think you could do that with any technology project. If it doesn't quite work out, you still have, if it's a paper copy or something else, you still have a fallback system. Or
maybe giving them a project that's really simple, and then work your way up, instead of letting them just do whatever they want, and then then they feel disappointed. Maybe have like a simple idea, and I think build up their confidence that way.
Oh, I mean, Ben and I started a long time ago. The way that we've approached, especially instructor librarians who might be a little nervous getting started, just the idea of playing together. We have been doing this since we ever learned how to use Scratch. You show somebody a project and you get really excited about it. You just play with the project. You don't have to do anything. You don't have to make anything. Just play with it. And then it tends to lead into this really cool tinkering. So having all those galleries online is really wonderful. Like we were just doing this last week. We'll look at what's new or any of the galleries on the Scratch website, and people are like picking out their favorite project and just sharing the project. They don't even know how it was programmed. They just want to show that somebody made this cool thing, and that it's really exciting, and that if you want, you can open it up and you can mess around with it. You don't have to, though. It's no problem. But like going from play, just start with play. Don't be afraid. Look at stuff. Talk about it with your friends, and then start to tinker around. Tends to be the way that I really love to work on this. So
I think that works really well for librarians. We've found over time, I also encourage people to pick a buddy, whether it's a teen or a youth that they can work with, whether it's their own child, a friend of a friend's child, or a regular kid who comes in the library, and explore it that way. But definitely starting with the play to, so that it doesn't feel like it's learning, that it feels like it's play, because it is. And finding something you like. One of the things I had fun with doing some workshops in the past was finding the various versions of like Harry Potter or Twilight that are on Scratch, and so encouraging people to go in, what do you know? Twilight, okay, look at the projects about Edward or Bella or whomever. So really start, oh, they're hysterical. So really start with what you like and look in Scratch for it, and chances are you'll find it, even if it's a children's, piece of children's literature, which creates that kind of common ground. The greeting cards is another thing that are really fun for people to look at and kind of get a sense of kind of what's capable there, and it again has that personal meaning to it. But I think having somebody to share it with in person when somebody's starting is a really valuable thing, whether it's a colleague or a kid. Either way, I think that's really helpful. That's that sense of encouragement, and we're kind of in it together and kind of let's explore it. So I encourage people to do that. Have a scratch buddy.
Well, Sonia, Ingrid, Jennifer, Keith, thank you so much for joining Mitch and I for this third in the series about Coding is for Everybody. You've given us a lot to think with, and so I hope people have been sharing notes in the Google Docs and via Twitter, and we'll try and coalesce some of these conversations and continue them next week in our fourth of four.
Fourth and final, right?
Mm-hmm. Do you want to say anything about next week?
Well, we'll be doing it'll be on the fourth theme that we have and about design-based learning, reflecting. So both be talking about the reflecting process in Scratch, and but also be reflecting back on maybe the seminar, the webinar overall, and reflecting back and looking ahead about some ways that people can move ahead based on some of the things that they've learned from it. So we'll probably be joining from a new location next week. But we'll be at a conference next week. So we'll be at a conference in British Columbia, and we'll be working out to join you we'll be running Scratch workshops and coding workshops and talking to lots of other people and engage in these activities, and hopefully we'll be able to draw upon some of those things in our final session.
So a full recording of this webinar and other curated content is going to be available on connectedlearning.tv by tomorrow. You can share that with your networks. We're going to be ending the webinar here, but we encourage you to continue the conversation on Twitter via the hashtag #LearnToCode, through the Connected Learning Google Plus community, Facebook, through all of your usual channels. And until then.
And should we also mention, if people want to dive deeper, people can also check out the online workshop that Karen's been running through the Scratch Ed community along with Ingrid. Ingrid is one of the participants there. So maybe just tell people how if they want to check that out.
Yeah, if you're really interested in sort of getting a hands-on experience, as has been advocated by our participants, I encourage you to check out Creative Computing Online Workshop. Susan Edenheim provided a link to it earlier in the chat, so thank you, Susan. And we'd love to see you there.
So either we'll see you online, and if not before, then we'll see you next Monday for the final session of our Coding is for Everybody webinar series. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.